So what happens when a person's trust in the healthcare system just completely breaks down? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty intense formal complaint that makes some absolutely staggering allegations. It's titled The Map of Medical Terrorism and Healthcare Corruption, and we're going to walk through it piece by piece using visuals pulled right from the document itself.
Right off the bat, this document does not pull any punches. I mean, this subtitle, When Illness Becomes an Instrument for Slow Execution and Systemic Plunder, is the very first thing you see. It's not just a dramatic title, it's the entire argument in a nutshell, framing a very personal health crisis as part of a huge predatory system.
So who is making these incredibly powerful claims? Well, the author is Professor Dr. Mohamed Fayad. He's an academic, and he's also a heart transplant recipient. He's acting pro se, which, just means he's representing himself, no lawyer. And get this, it's labeled Communication Number 1 of 100, and it's addressed directly to the top brass in California's government. To really get a handle on this complaint, it helps to see it in 3 parts. First up, you have the plaintiff, Professor Fayad, whose critical health condition is really at the center of this whole story. Second, you have the people he's writing to, California's governor, the attorney general, the top officials. And finally, the allegations themselves, this detailed map of what he calls systemic coercion.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of the complaint. The entire case, everything in it, is built around this one powerful concept the author calls the framework of medical coercion. Let's break down exactly what he means by that.
So here it is. This is the central idea. According to this document, we're not just talking about isolated mistakes or a bit of malpractice. He's talking about the deliberate weaponization of a patient's vulnerability, in his case, being a heart transplant recipient, to inflict both psychological and financial damage through a coordinated predatory network. The author paints such a stark picture here. He basically argues that the system has completely corrupted its own purpose. The very institution that is supposed to be a sanctuary for healing has, in his telling, morphed into a predatory network that actually thrives on the suffering of the vulnerable. From there, the complaint starts pointing fingers. It starts naming the specific players in this alleged network. And it begins with the most direct ones, the medical providers themselves, so the hospitals and the clinics. This table really lays out the specific claims pretty clearly. So on one side, you've got hospitals like El Camino and Stanford. They're accused of making him wait for hours and giving no real care, which the author flat out calls institutional fraud. Then on the other side, you have clinics like Palo Alto Medical. They're accused of something else, intimidation, and just completely stopping follow-up care for a transplant patient, which he calls professional abandonment.
And to really drive these claims home, the document cites a very specific number, $12,000. That's a bill he says he got from El Camino Hospital for a visit where he alleges he waited 3 hours and got no substantive care at all. He uses this figure as Exhibit A for his claim of financial extortion.
And this quote, wow, it just captures the author's disillusionment so perfectly. He argues that physicians aren't really healers anymore, guided by ethics. Instead, he says they've become mechanical bureaucrats who rely on intimidation, condescension, and systemic racism. It's a huge shift from a position of trust to one of, fear. But this map of coercion, as he calls it, doesn't just stop with the doctors and hospitals. Nope. The complaint then widens its lens to the whole financial side of the system, the payers. We're talking pharmacies and insurance companies. So here, the complaint describes what sounds like a 2-pronged financial attack. You've got pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS accused of withholding life-saving medicine, an act he calls financial blackmail. Then you have insurers like Medicare, who are described as silent partners in the whole thing, just creating endless bureaucratic hurdles. The author's conclusion? It's a conspiracy. And all of this creates what the document calls an impossible choice, a grim ultimatum for the patient. You can either risk death by going without the medicine you desperately need, or you can face financial ruin by paying these exorbitant out-of-pocket costs. It's presented as a true life-or-death decision. Now, as the complaint starts to wrap up, the author's personal plea gets a lot bigger. He's arguing that these aren't just isolated failures. He claims they're all symptoms of a vast, interconnected system of corruption.
The author is really clear about his goal here. He says it plainly. He is not looking for sympathy. He's not asking for pity. Instead, he frames this whole thing as a demand for fundamental justice, invoking the country's founding principles as his basis for that demand.
And if you want to understand the sheer scope of this alleged network, just look at the distribution list. The carbon copy or CC list is just staggering. It was sent to almost every sector of society you can think of. Government, banks, universities, law firms, regulatory bodies, even the media. The author uses this to argue that these aren't separate problems, but all part of one intricately interconnected system.
And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? We've just walked through this incredibly detailed and severe complaint from one person. Now, without judging whether it's valid or not, it leaves you to wonder, when a single voice feels the need to map out such a huge systemic network of failure, what does that tell us about the pressures, the fears, and just the sheer complexity within the system itself? It's definitely something to think about.